One of the most common questions I get is, what components do I need to build my off-road vehicle and be capable? So I'm going to go over this vehicle that we just set up. Obviously, some other things still need done to it, like fender flares and bumpers, rock sliders, but the meat and potatoes of this build are done, and that's what I want to show you. And we'd roughly run about 20 to 25 trips per year off-road. So what components have worked for us and have held up and truly stood the test of time? We don't have any affiliation. There is a decent amount of money still into this, but it's not nearly the kind of money that we have into, say, our Jeep that, say, we have 1 tons and 40s and things like that. This one's sitting on 44s and 37s and should be able to stand up to what he puts it through abuse-wise. So I'm going to show you these components. Tell me what you guys think. Also, if you guys think there's a better component than maybe one that I point at on here, comment below. Tell me what you think's better, or maybe you've seen some failures, or just share your experiences as well. The more we can educate each other, the better off we'll be, right? All right, so step one is always to have what? Lockers before light bars. And the easiest and cheapest, most affordable way to get this done is to buy yourself a set of Rubicon takeoff axles. So there are people that are pulling these out to go to 60s, or maybe they have wrecked their vehicle or something along those lines. You're going to save yourself a lot of time, effort, and money if you can find a set of these that already have an axle truss and armor on the C's, as well as probably a re-geared axle already. So in this case, he actually got really lucky. He found these axles with all that done with a 488 gear, which is a great match for this 3.6 automatic with a 37-inch tire. Next big expense you're going to have is rims and tires. Probably a 35 or a 37-inch tire is generally the goal here for most people. You can still drive around town on this pretty easily, get in and out with a little hop, and also be very capable on the trails. I think a 37 is pretty much the baseline nowadays. We have become a really big fan of these Mickey Thompson Baja Boss MT tires. We have seen multiple friends use these. They work really well on the trails. They work really well on the roads. They're lasting quite a few miles. As you can tell, they come with a lot of tread depth on them, which is very nice. Availability and cost is on point with these compared to a lot of the other tires. You're also going to need to make sure that you get some kind of a rim that has a little offset to it. If you're going to run your stock rims, you're probably going to need a 1.5-inch wheel spacer to allow for room between the tire and your control arm and your frame. Also, when you go to turn these big tires, so you're not getting into the frame. What kind of back spacing do you want on your rims? Look for 4.25 or less as that number for that back spacing number. Obviously, if you can get true bead locks, even better yet. But sometimes you work with what you got, and these are going to do the job just fine. All right, let's talk lift components. We have been a huge fan, as far as springs go, of Metal Cloak for years. We really like the dual rate spring, like you're seeing here. And the finish holds up very well up here in the rust belt as well. The big thing about the dual rate is you do have that second stack of coils there. And when this vehicle articulates out, that allows that to still stay seated and not fall out of its place. For shocks, we really like the Fox shocks. There are other really good brands that we've run as well. We have run Bilsteins in the past, so they're a pretty good shock as well. Ranchos, but I also really love Old Man Emu for shocks. Old Man Emu works very well for cost, availability, and everything else. We really like these Fox shocks. So while we're on the back here and we're looking, another thing you're going to need is some kind of a track bar bracket for the rear. This one happens to just be a Mopar track bar bracket I had on my shelf, so that's what we used on this vehicle. You're going to need longer sway bar links, as you can see here. The stock ones are way too short. This gentleman chose a 4.5-inch lift, which is going to be a great fit for these 37s and give them all kinds of room. Anything works. We just got these off of eBay or Amazon. They work just fine. The main objective is to basically keep this sway bar end at ride height, should be at a minimum level, but really should be pointed up roughly 5 to 10 degrees. Also, you can do drop brackets for the brake lines, but a aftermarket metal brake line like this that's extended, you can get these off of Amazon for very inexpensive. I think we got all 4 here for maybe $50, very inexpensive. One other thing to consider, I'll give you guys a little heads up on, is you do have to watch this brake line bracket usually mounts up here. You need to watch so this does not strike the sway bar itself. So that's why this got bent over, and we moved it to the inside and dropped it a little bit, so that way that'll clearance. You will need a wire harness for the locker if you're going with the Rubicon axles, and we also like for bump stop extensions the metal cloak pucks. They stagger forward, which works out great for not hitting the track bar bracket bolt like some do. And check your actual bump stops themselves. Those bump stops up there, I really like the metal cloaks again for those. Great price point. They work very well. I've been running those on my Jeep for roughly 3 years. The old ones have a tendency to crumble and be dry rotted at this point, just like his were, so we got those replaced. We're just running the stock track bar for now. Hopefully eventually we'll replace that, but that's doing the job just fine as we speak. I guess one more thing, control arms. We'll talk about that on the front as well, but at a minimum, you really need to do a lower adjustable control arm. I really like the metal cloak again because in the rust belt, the finish holds up extremely well. From what I've seen so far, we've only personally run them for about 1.5 years on our Jeep. The bushings hold up very well as well. So let's move on to the front and talk about some steering components. I'll tell you one other thing that I do. Every bolt that goes into my vehicle back in, on the threads themselves that go through this, we've been doing this for a long time, we slather up with anti-seize. Not on the spot where the nut goes, but actually where the bolt comes through. It gets covered heavily to keep that from rusting, but also keep it so that way 5-10 years from now when these come out, they'll be able to come out. We started doing this back in the TJ days, and we've had to cut out so many control arm bolts, amongst other things. So we're on to the front here. Again, the same extended brake line. It's literally a 4-pack of the same thing we bought. I would plan on doing ABS sensors while you're at it. These have a tendency to not want to come out of the knuckle easily, so those are $25 a piece. I would plan on doing those. All right, let's move on to the front here. Oh man, look who it is. Little man with his own Jeep. Say hi, Iris, say hi. The front end components are probably going to be the most important. That's what's a big part of what's going to keep this vehicle driving straight and not have death wobble and all these other problems that Jeeps have. It does take some pretty beefy components. Let's go over what I suggest here. Let's first of all start talking about sway bar links. Sway bar links, you can go multiple ways here. This is a JKS style quick disconnect. This is probably the most affordable way to do this. I want to say those are right around $100 for those. And when you get to the trail, you can just pull a pin, and remove those to give yourself that added 20 to 30% articulation. All right, moving on. Steering stabilizer. Love the Fox. It is the stiffest. And with that being stiff, that allows you to not have a large rebound when these big tires hit a pothole and want to do this with your steering wheel. It keeps that from jerking like that. They work extremely well. So love the Fox for that. I do believe TerraFlex makes something similar that I've heard good things about. I've never personally run it. The price point is about $100 more than the Fox, and that's why we just go with the Fox. I know it works. So let's talk tie rod bar and drag link. That's the two silver aluminum bars you see here. This setup here is actually made by Fusion. The other brand that I really like, and actually on my own Jeep I have moved to, is RPM. The Fusion, especially for a 37, is going to hold up just fine. It's actually kind of almost overkill. It's 2.5 ton steering, so it has these giant rebuildable ends, which I like. So the real downfall, and the only downfall to this in that RPM, that's why we switched over, is these rods are actually larger on the RPM.
Whoa, the engine.
See the engine up there?
No.
Can you say tie rod? Tie rod. What we had happen and why we moved to the RPM is we actually had one of these brakes in the threaded area when we were on the trail because this metal's slightly thinner on the Fusion, so the RPM has a thicker bar, so we chose that to beef this up. Secondly, you're going to see here is this black bar. That is our track bar. That is made by Steer Smarts. You'll either see them in red or black. The thickness of this is twice what an OEM bar is. This is actually solid. It weighs 4 times what an OEM bar does, and they just have zero give when they want to do that. The only thing I've seen so far is we've been running these on my Jeep for 4 years, and we're just at the point now where I need to put new bushings in it. The bar itself is just fine. So I've had 2 or 3 of these now that are 4 years old. I've had to put bushings in. Otherwise, these things are never gonna fail. I will say, SteerSmart's track bar, they make a phenomenal track bar. I am not a huge fan of their tie rod or their drag link. I've seen multiple of those bends, so I'm not really gonna suggest those. Again, we are running the metal cloak control arms. You wanna have your axle trussed, just like you're seeing here. When you put these lockers in, you're not gonna have electrical. Let's talk about what I recommend for the electrical. And the great part about this, it's going to make things easy from here on out. All kinds of companies that make these, S-Pod and so on, the list goes on. They come with all these stickers here, and whatever it is you put in place, put the sticker on to match that. So the only thing we have so far are our lockers. So this comes on with the key. And you will see this light up with the on button. And then you can turn on your lockers. These are electronic, so you don't hear any pump running. And you can actually shut this off if you're not using it. See, this has a built-in wire harness that we have just loomed back into the dashboard, and it runs up underneath the dash and through the firewall. So anytime you want to hook up to this, you're not running any wires through the firewall. You're just going to hook up underneath with a single wire under the hood. Let me show you that. So this particular one I just purchased off of Amazon. Actually, Bullet Point phone mounts that we resell for actually just started selling a 8-gang version of this. So it has 8 switches on it for about $175 on the website. I think I sell them in person for $140 at the shows. So the way these works is they have a pre-made, basically a fuse box. So you're going to see right here, it has fuses and relays already all built in. And it has pre-made wires already coming out, which that's what you see here. And we just went through the firewall with those. And then from each one of the things I come up to this with, we're just going to hook on a ground post here and run a single wire into this to have that hooked up. So super easy. And then out of this again, you're going to have this single wire right here, goes to the passenger side, hooks up to the positive very easily, and it has a second wire for the controller that is going to be our keyed on power. You can do that either keyed on or key off. On my Jeep, I started that with key on initially, and then we found that I basically wanted to run my rock lights when we were out at parking lot parties and things of that nature, and so I didn't want to have to leave my keys in the ignition. So we switched over to where it's always on, and with the one that I have in that positive line, we actually put a breaker so we can just switch that off if my Jeep's sitting for a while. So I'm a big fan of that. I'm going to estimate he has put an additional $10,000 in product into this. Spring wise, right around $500. Shocks, right around $600. Rims and tires, if you're having to buy rims, you could say $4,000. Axles, between $3,000 to $5,000. Sway bar links, you're going to be $150. Brake lines, $100. Track bar, $250. Steering, depending on which way you go, anywhere between $600 and $1,000. This particular setup's a $1,000 setup. Track bar bracket, another like $80. You end up giving another like $500 on other little brackets and things like that. Pushing $10,000. I didn't do the math there. One of you guys can add that up if you want to. This Jeep's going to be on the trails with us in Kentucky in just a few weeks, so we'll get to see this thing in action. Hopefully before then we're going to get the inner flares in, some fender flares on it, and at least a front bumper and hopefully a winch. We're not as worried about the rear. I told him for a budget right now, we might just put a extender on here to be able to run that 37, and when he's running around town, he's just going to run without a spare tire for the time being. But he's thinking maybe doing a frame chop back here, just like I've got on my Jeep, and get rid of this altogether. So it's hard to hit a rear bumper if you don't have one, as my buddy Kyle would say. What do you guys think? Pretty good looking rig? I think she'll get around well.